Sarah opens the Randonautica app on her phone, standing at the familiar corner where Oak Street meets Maple Avenue, a place she has passed 1,000 times on her way to the coffee shop 3 blocks from her apartment. This morning, though, she is not heading for coffee. She types a single word into the intention field: discovery. The app hums to life, reaching out through layers of code and circuitry to something called a quantum random number generator, a device that taps into the fundamental uncertainty at the heart of reality itself. Within seconds, coordinates appear on her screen, a destination chosen not by algorithm or pattern, but by the collapse of quantum probability waves, pointing to a spot 7/10 of a mile away in a direction she rarely traveled. This is randonauting, a practice that has captivated hundreds of thousands of people worldwide since 2018, when a small app promised something extraordinary: the ability to break free from the invisible tunnels of habit that guide our daily lives and discover places we would never otherwise find. The premise sounds almost mystical. Our routines create probability tunnels, paths we walk so often they become grooves in the fabric of our existence. We take the same route to work, shop at the same stores, walk the same streets until our lives become deterministic, predictable, bounded by invisible walls of our own making. Randonauting claims to shatter these walls, using quantum randomness to generate coordinates that lie outside our personal probability distributions, leading us to anomalies in the statistical field of our daily pattern. The terminology feels borrowed from science fiction. Attractors are points where quantum randomness seems to cluster unusually high, creating density in the probability field. Voids are the opposite, areas where the quantum noise seems strangely absent, creating pockets of statistical emptiness. Both are called anomalies, deviations from what randomness should look like if the world were purely mechanical and meaningless. And then there is intent, perhaps the strangest variable of all, the thought or desire you hold in your mind before the quantum generator produces your coordinates, the question whispered into the void before it whispers back. What happens next is where mystery enters. Users report finding objects, places, or encounters that seem impossibly connected to their stated intentions. Someone sets the intent lost childhood and arrives at coordinates pointing to their old elementary school, demolished years ago but marked now by a single rusted swing set. Another types answers and finds a book lying open on a park bench, its pages displaying a passage that speaks directly to a question they have been wrestling with for months. These are the synchronicities, the meaningful coincidences that transform randonauting from a quirky experiment into something that feels, to those who experience it, like evidence that consciousness and reality might be far more entangled than our everyday assumptions allow. But are they? This is the question that will guide our journey together through the phenomenon of randonauting, through its origins in quantum theory and chaos mathematics, through the experiences of those who swear it changed their understanding of reality, and through the explanations offered by psychologists, statisticians, and physicists who see nothing supernatural at work. We stand at an intersection between science and belief, between measurable reality and felt experience, and the path forward requires both curiosity and careful scrutiny. Something is happening when people randonaut. The question is what? Sarah Martinez had been staring at the same 4 walls of her studio apartment for 3 months straight when she first heard about randonauting. It was late spring of 2020, the world had gone quiet, and she felt like her entire existence had shrunk to the size of a shoebox. The app promised something simple, almost too simple to believe. Set an intention, receive coordinates, and walk to a place chosen by quantum randomness. She downloaded it on a Tuesday evening, typed the word joy into the intention field, and watched as the algorithm generated a location 0.6 miles from her apartment in Portland, Oregon. The walk took her nearly 2 hours. She passed through neighborhoods she had driven by 1,000 times, but never actually seen. The anticipation built with each block, a strange cocktail of excitement and skepticism swirling in her chest. What would she find? Probably nothing, she told herself. Probably just another parking lot or a patch of weeds behind a strip mall. But something kept her moving forward, some curious pull that felt almost magnetic. When her phone finally indicated she had reached the destination, Sarah found herself standing at the edge of a wrought iron fence she had never noticed before, even though she had lived in the city for 7 years. Beyond the fence stretched an explosion of color that made her catch her breath. Thousands of wildflowers, poppies and lupines and flowers she could not name, rolled across a hidden hillside tucked between two residential blocks. The field seemed impossible, a secret garden that had no business existing in the middle of an urban grid. Sarah later learned it was a restoration project managed by a local conservation group, deliberately kept low profile to prevent overcrowding. But in that moment, standing alone with the late afternoon sun turning everything golden, she did not know any of that. She only knew that she had asked for joy, and joy had answered. She sat in that field for over an hour, just breathing, just being. When she finally walked home, something fundamental had shifted. The world felt bigger again, full of hidden pockets of wonder waiting to be discovered. Sarah randonauted 17 more times that summer, each journey adding another layer to her mental map of the city she thought she knew. But it was that first field of wildflowers that changed everything, that reminded her the world still held surprises, even in the darkest times. Marcus Chin was not looking for anything mystical when he set his intention to connection. He was just lonely. After relocating to Austin, Texas for work, he had spent 8 months in a city where he knew exactly 3 people, all of them co-workers he saw 40 hours a week anyway. His social life had flatlined, and dating apps felt like scrolling through an endless catalog of strangers. A friend back home mentioned randonauting as a way to explore the city, so Marcus decided to give it a try on a Saturday morning in September. The coordinates took him to a part of East Austin he had never visited, a neighborhood of small houses with carefully tended yards. When he arrived at the precise location, he found himself standing in front of a tall wooden gate decorated with hand-painted sunflowers. Through the slats, he could see raised garden beds and hear voices, laughter, the sound of children playing. A sign on the gate read, "Welcome to Sunshine Community Garden," and below that, in smaller letters, "All neighbors welcome, Saturdays 9 to noon." Marcus hesitated. He had not planned on actually interacting with anyone. The whole point of randonauting, he thought, was the solitary exploration, the personal quest. But he had set his intention to connection, and here was a gate, literally, inviting him in. He pushed it open. Inside, he found about 15 people scattered among the garden plots, weeding, watering, harvesting tomatoes and peppers. An older woman named Gloria spotted him immediately and walked over, dirt on her knees, a huge smile on her face. She asked if he was there to help or to get a plot of his own, and before Marcus quite knew what was happening, he was being given a tour, introduced to other gardeners, handed a pair of gloves, and shown a corner plot that had just become available. That was 2 years ago. Marcus still tends that plot every Saturday morning. He has learned to grow jalapenos and cilantro, has been invited to backyard barbecues and birthday parties, has found the kind of community he thought only existed in small towns or old movies. 3 of his closest friends now are people he met that first day at Sunshine Garden. He even dated another gardener for 6 months, though they decided they were better as friends. When people ask him how he found the garden, he tells them about randonauting, about setting an intention and trusting the coordinates. Most people think it is just a coincidence, but Marcus is not so sure. He asked for connection and was led to exactly the place where connection was waiting for him. Emily Rodriguez and her 10-year-old daughter Zoe started randonauting together as a summer adventure project. Emily had read an article about it and thought it might be a fun way to get Zoe away from screens and out exploring their small city of Asheville, North Carolina. Their first few trips were pleasant but unremarkable. They found an interesting rock formation, an old cemetery, a view of the mountains they had not seen before. Nice, but nothing life-changing. Their 4th trip was different. Zoe chose the intention this time. She thought for a long moment, then typed in the word, wonder. The coordinates appeared, leading them to a trail system on the outskirts of town. They parked and started walking, following the GPS deeper into the woods. The anticipation felt different this time, more electric. Zoe kept asking, "How much farther are we close? What do you think we will find?" Emily had no idea, but she felt it too, that sense that something waited for them at the end of this particular path. When they reached the coordinates, they found themselves in a grove of old-growth trees surrounding a small waterfall that fed into a crystal-clear pool. But that was not the wonder Zoe had asked for. The wonder was in the trees themselves. Dozens of them had small wooden doors attached to their trunks at the base, tiny fairy doors painted in bright colors, each one unique. Some had miniature welcome mats, others had little mailboxes or flower pots. The forest had been transformed into a fairy village, clearly the work of some dedicated artist or group of artists who had spent hours creating this magical installation in the middle of the woods. Zoe was transfixed. She spent the next hour examining each door, making up stories about who lived behind them, leaving small offerings of interesting pebbles and acorns. Emily watched her daughter's imagination come alive in a way that felt increasingly rare in their structured screen-saturated world. They came back to the fairy grove 6 more times that summer. Zoe brought friends, showed them the doors, and the place became part of her mythology of childhood, one of those formative memories that would stay with her forever. For Emily, the experience crystallized something she had been struggling to articulate. In their rush to keep Zoe safe, educated, and entertained, they had accidentally scheduled the magic right out of her childhood. Randonauting gave them permission to wander, to seek without knowing what they would find, to be surprised by their own city. It was not really about the quantum random number generator or the intention setting, Emily realized. It was about remembering how to be curious, how to explore, how to believe that wonder still existed if you went looking for it. James Park had been randonauting for months before he had his defining experience. He was a data analyst by trade, naturally skeptical, drawn to randonauting more as an interesting experiment in randomness than any belief in meaningful coincidence. He kept a spreadsheet of all his trips, rating the locations for interest, noting whether they seemed to match his stated intentions. The results were mixed, he concluded. Roughly what you would expect from chance. Then he set the intention surprise and received coordinates that led him to a small bookshop in his neighborhood of Seattle, a place he had walked past hundreds of times but never entered. It looked unremarkable from the outside, just another used bookstore in a city full of them. But it was the designated quantum point, so James went inside. The shop was narrow and deep, crammed floor to ceiling with books. An older man sat behind the counter reading, barely glancing up as James entered. James wandered the aisles, unsure what he was looking for. He was in the poetry section, a genre he never read, when he saw it. A slim volume with a cover the exact shade of blue his late grandmother had loved. He pulled it out. The book was a collection of Korean poetry, published in 1983. His grandmother had been Korean, had come to America in 1965, had died when James was 12. He opened the book randomly. The poem on that page was about a grandmother teaching her grandson to make kimchi, about the smell of garlic and red pepper, about hands working together across generations. James stood in that aisle and cried, something he had not done since the funeral 15 years earlier. He bought the book. He still cannot fully explain why that moment affected him so deeply, why it felt like a message, a reminder, a gift delivered through the mechanism of quantum randomness and his own 2 feet. James does not talk about this experience much. It does not fit neatly into his analytical worldview. But he still randonauts regularly, and he stopped keeping the spreadsheet. Some things, he decided, do not need to be quantified to be real. These stories represent just a fraction of the millions of randonauting experiences shared online and in communities around the world. They share common threads. The anticipation of the journey. The moment of arrival when expectation meets reality. The interpretation phase where meaning is made, whether through obvious synchronicity or subtle resonance. What draws people back again and again is not always dramatic revelation, but rather these small moments of connection, wonder, and surprise that break the monotony of routine existence. In a world that often feels completely mapped, cataloged, and explained, randonauting offers something increasingly rare. The possibility of genuine discovery, the chance to be surprised by your own life, the permission to wander with purpose toward destinations unknown. The coordinates appeared on their screens, like any other set of numbers generated by the Randonautica app. It was late, June 2020, and Seattle was still wrapped in the strange quiet of early pandemic lockdown. A group of friends had decided to spend their afternoon following quantum-generated points on a map, looking for adventure in a world that had suddenly become very small. They expected to find something unusual, perhaps something beautiful. They loaded the app, set their intention, and watched as it calculated a destination based on quantum randomness. The pin dropped on a location along Alki Beach, a rocky stretch of shoreline in West Seattle, where the Olympic Mountains rise in the distance across the gray waters of Puget Sound. They made their way to the coordinates, filming their journey on TikTok as so many randonauts do. The phone cameras captured their lighthearted banter, the crunch of their shoes on the rocky beach, the lap of water against stone. It was supposed to be a fun experiment, a way to break the monotony of quarantine. The group walked closer to the water's edge, and that's when they saw it. A black suitcase, partially obscured by driftwood and debris, sitting just above the tide line. At first, it seemed like ordinary beach trash. Seattle shorelines collect all manner of discarded items, and a forgotten suitcase wouldn't be particularly noteworthy. But something about it drew their attention. Perhaps it was the way it sat there, deliberately placed rather than washed up. Perhaps it was the smell that became noticeable as they approached. One of them suggested they open it. Another hesitated. The TikTok videos capture this moment, the uncertainty in their voices, the nervous laughter that precedes discovery. When they moved closer, the smell intensified. It was unmistakable now, the sweet rot that triggers something primal in human awareness. They didn't open the suitcase themselves. Instead, they called the police, stepping back from their find, the excitement of their randonauting adventure curdling into something else entirely. Within hours, the beach was cordoned off. Investigators in protective gear carefully examined the black suitcase, and what they found inside confirmed the worst possibilities. Human remains, badly decomposed, stuffed into the luggage and abandoned on this public beach. The Seattle Police Department launched a homicide investigation immediately. Within days, they discovered a second suitcase nearby, containing more remains. The medical examiner determined that the remains belonged to two individuals, later identified as 27-year-old Jessica Lewis and her 26-year-old boyfriend Austin Wenner. They had been shot and killed, their bodies dismembered and disposed of in multiple suitcases along the shoreline. Investigators eventually arrested a suspect who had been renting a unit in the same building where the victims lived. The suspect allegedly killed the couple during a dispute, then attempted to dispose of the evidence in perhaps the most grim way imaginable. But the question that haunted everyone who followed the case went beyond the terrible facts of the murder itself. Why had the Randonautica app led these young people directly to this specific location? The app's algorithm generates coordinates based on quantum random number generation, selecting points that fall outside normal human travel patterns. It's designed to break people out of their routine pathways, to introduce true randomness into their exploration. The odds of randomly selecting the exact coordinates where human remains had been hidden were astronomical. Yet, that's precisely what happened. The group of friends who made the discovery were traumatized. Their TikTok videos went viral, viewed millions of times, and they found themselves at the center of a media storm. They had set out looking for a minor adventure, and instead became key witnesses in a double homicide. The app had led them to death, with uncanny precision. Some tried to rationalize it as pure coincidence, the inevitable result of thousands of people using the app daily. Eventually, someone would stumble onto something terrible. But others saw it as evidence of something darker in how the app functioned, some unknown mechanism that drew users toward significant locations, whether positive or negative. The Seattle case became the most famous randonauting incident, but it was far from the only one that carried an unsettling weight. In the months that followed, other stories emerged from users who found themselves in places that felt impossibly specific to their lives, their fears, their secrets. A woman in Portland used the app one autumn evening, setting her intention as she'd been instructed. She wanted to find something meaningful, though she didn't specify what that meant. The coordinates took her to a residential neighborhood she'd never visited, to a house on a quiet street lined with maple trees shedding gold leaves. She stood on the sidewalk staring at the house for several minutes before the memories began flooding back. This was the house from her recurring nightmare, the one she'd been having for months. The same green door, the same narrow windows, the same concrete steps leading to the porch. She had never been to this neighborhood before. She was certain of it. Yet her subconscious had somehow constructed this exact house in perfect detail, and now the app had led her directly to it. She posted about the experience in online randonauting communities, and the responses she received were unsettling in their familiarity. Dozens of others reported similar experiences. being led to locations that matched dreams they'd had, places that triggered memories they couldn't quite place, addresses that meant nothing to them consciously, but produced powerful emotional reactions. One man described being taken to an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of his city, a place he'd never noticed despite driving past the general area for years. When he got out of his car and approached the building, he was overwhelmed by a sense of grief, so intense he had to sit down. He had no explanation for the feeling, no memory attached to the location, just a crushing weight of sadness that lasted for hours afterward. Another case involved a college student in the Midwest who randonauted with friends to coordinates that led them to a clearing in a public park. They arrived just before dusk, the light fading between the trees, and found the remains of what appeared to be a campsite. A circle of stones for a fire pit, empty cans scattered in the grass, and crucially, yellow police tape tangled in the nearby brush. The tape was weathered, but still bore the words, "Crime scene, do not cross." They searched for news reports and eventually found a brief article from 18 months earlier. A man had been assaulted in that exact clearing, beaten badly enough to require hospitalization. The case had gone unsolved. The student who found the location said she felt watched the entire time they were there, as if the violence that had occurred in that space had left something behind, some residue that made the air feel heavier. These weren't stories of finding treasure or beautiful vistas. They were accounts of the app leading people to places soaked in trauma, to locations that held significance they couldn't explain. A woman in Ohio was led to a corner lot in a declining neighborhood where the foundation of a demolished house still remained. She felt compelled to search the area and found a rusted lockbox partially buried in the weeds. Inside were photographs of children from what appeared to be the 1970s or 80s, along with newspaper clippings about a house fire. She turned the box over to police, but the connection to her own life nagged at her. Her mother had lost a sibling in a house fire as a child, a tragedy that was rarely discussed in her family. The location was 3 states away from where her mother grew up, and yet somehow the app had drawn her to this echo of her family's hidden grief. The pattern that emerged from these experiences wasn't about the supernatural, at least not in the traditional sense. It was about the eerie precision with which randomness seemed to find meaning. Skeptics argued that humans are pattern-seeking creatures who will find significance in any coincidence. With thousands of people using the app daily, strange matches were inevitable. But those who experienced these moments directly struggled with that explanation. The specificity was too acute. The emotional impact too profound. It felt less like finding a needle in a haystack, and more like the needle finding you. Some users began to suspect that the app was tapping into something beyond simple quantum randomness. Perhaps it was accessing information from their digital footprints, their search histories, their location data, and using that to guide them to relevant places. But technical analyses of the app showed no evidence of such data harvesting. Others proposed that the quantum random number generation was somehow influenced by consciousness itself, that human intention could nudge probability in subtle ways. This bordered on pseudoscience, but it offered an explanation for why setting a specific intention seemed to produce results aligned with that intention, even when the results were disturbing. What remained undeniable was the psychological toll these discoveries took on the people involved. The Seattle group never used the app again. The woman who found her nightmare house moved to a different city within 6 months. The college students who discovered the crime scene clearing reported feeling anxious whenever they visited any wooded area. These weren't just interesting stories to share online. They were experiences that fundamentally altered how these individuals understood coincidence, randomness, and the hidden architecture of their own lives. The app continued to grow in popularity despite these dark cases, or perhaps because of them. The promise of discovering something genuinely unexpected proved irresistible, even when that discovery came with risk. Users developed rituals and superstitions. Some refused to randonaut alone. Others would only do it during daylight hours. Many avoided setting intentions related to anything negative or emotionally charged, having learned from others' experiences that the app seemed to take intentions seriously, sometimes in ways that felt almost malicious in their literalness. The darkness that entered randonauting through these cases never fully left. It became part of the app's identity, a shadow that followed every expedition. The thrill of exploration was now tinged with genuine uncertainty about what might be found. And for those who had stumbled onto something terrible, something traumatic, something that felt impossibly tailored to their deepest fears or forgotten memories, the experience left a permanent mark. A reminder that sometimes when you go looking for the unexpected, you find exactly what you weren't prepared to face. In the spring of 2008, a small group of researchers in Russia began asking a peculiar question that would eventually reshape how millions of people interact with their physical environment. The Fatum Project, as they called themselves, wondered whether human consciousness might be trapped in an invisible cage of its own making, whether our daily paths through the world were so predictable, so thoroughly predetermined by habit and convenience, that we were effectively blind to vast swaths of reality surrounding us every single day. The concept they developed became known as probability blind spots. Imagine for a moment the route you take to work, to the grocery store, to your favorite coffee shop. Now imagine every single path you have ever taken in your city, every street you have walked down, every building you have entered. If we could map all of these movements from above, they would form a pattern, a web of lines that covers certain areas densely while leaving other spaces completely untouched. These untouched spaces, the Fatum researchers theorized, were not random gaps. They were systematic exclusions created by the architecture of human decision-making itself. The Fatum Project drew inspiration from earlier work in quantum mechanics and information theory. They proposed that human beings, despite our sense of free will, operate much like algorithmic systems when choosing where to go. We select destinations based on prior knowledge, visible landmarks, recommendations from others, and optimization for convenience. This means that certain locations, despite being physically accessible, have essentially zero probability of ever being visited by any given person. They exist in a kind of informational shadow, invisible not because they are hidden, but because our decision-making processes systematically exclude them from consideration. What information might exist in these probability blind spots? The Fatum researchers did not claim to know, but they suggested that breaking free from deterministic movement patterns could expose individuals to novel experiences, unexpected discoveries, and perhaps even statistically anomalous events that might reveal something about the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. To test these ideas, they needed a method for generating truly random locations, coordinates, that no human decision-making process would ever naturally select. This requirement brought them face to face with a fundamental distinction in mathematics and computer science: the difference between algorithmic randomness and true randomness. Most random number generators, including those used in computer programs and smartphone applications, are not actually random at all. They are pseudorandom, produced by deterministic algorithms that generate sequences of numbers appearing random but actually following complex mathematical formulas. Given the same starting seed value, a pseudorandom number generator will always produce the exact same sequence. This makes them useful for many purposes, but philosophically, they remain prisoners of deterministic causation. True randomness, the Fatum Project believed, required quantum mechanics. At the quantum scale, certain physical processes appear to be genuinely indeterministic, producing outcomes that are not merely unpredictable due to complexity, but are fundamentally uncaused, according to our best scientific understanding. Radioactive decay, photon behavior at beam splitters, and quantum tunneling events all exhibit this property. When you measure a quantum system, the outcome cannot be predicted even with perfect information about prior conditions. This is not a gap in our knowledge, but appears to be a basic feature of reality itself. The Australian National University operates one of the world's most sophisticated quantum random number generators, publicly accessible through the internet. This system uses quantum optical processes, specifically measuring the quantum fluctuations of a vacuum state in real time, to produce numbers that are random in the deepest possible sense. Unlike algorithmic generators, these numbers have no hidden pattern, no secret formula that determines their value. They emerge from the irreducible uncertainty at the foundation of the physical world. This technology became the heart of what would eventually become the Randonautica application. The distinction matters, according to the theory, because using quantum randomness removes human attention not just from the conscious selection of a destination, but from the mathematical substrate generating the coordinates. An algorithmic random number generator might still, in some subtle way, be connected to human design and purpose. A quantum generator produces coordinates that no pattern of causation extending from human consciousness could have influenced. Joshua Langfelder and his development team began building the Randonautica app in 2019, transforming the theoretical framework of the Fathom project into an accessible smartphone experience. The application allows users to center a search radius around their current location, set an intention, and then receive coordinates generated by quantum random number processes. These coordinates typically point to locations within walking or driving distance, often places the user has never visited despite perhaps living nearby for years. The early community that formed around Randonautica consisted of adventurous experimenters, people drawn to the intersection of technology, philosophy, and exploration. They shared trip reports describing abandoned buildings discovered 3 blocks from home, unexpected natural beauty found in industrial areas, and strange coincidences between their stated intentions and what they encountered at the random coordinate. The community developed its own vocabulary. An attractor point represented coordinates with the highest concentration of quantum randomness within the search radius. A void represented the opposite, the point with the lowest concentration, a kind of hole in the probability field. Anomalies were locations exhibiting unusual quantum statistical properties. Users reported experiences ranging from the mundane to the profoundly strange. Some found interesting graffiti or pleasant parks they had never known existed. Others described encounters that seemed impossibly coincidental, discovering objects or situations directly related to the intentions they had set before generating their random coordinates. A user thinking about their deceased grandmother might arrive at coordinates and find an old photograph. Someone setting the intention yellow might turn a corner to find an entirely yellow building or car. Skeptics correctly pointed out that such coincidences could easily result from confirmation bias and selective reporting, but the experiences felt meaningful to those who had them, and the community grew steadily. Then came 2020, and the world contracted. As pandemic lockdowns confined billions of people to their homes and immediate neighborhoods, a peculiar psychological hunger emerged. People desperately craved novelty, new experiences, any sense of discovery and exploration within the suddenly tiny radius of permitted movement. Randonautica offered exactly this, the promise of finding something new and unexpected within the same few square miles that had become simultaneously prison and entire world. In the early summer of 2020, Randonautica exploded on TikTok. The platform's young user base embraced the app with viral intensity, filming their randonaut expeditions and sharing them with millions of viewers. The videos followed a formula: show the app, generating coordinates, film the journey to the location, reveal what you find there. Many videos documented genuinely eerie coincidences. Others stumbled into abandoned places with haunting atmospheres. Some users claimed to discover locations connected to crimes or tragedies, though many of these claims proved difficult to verify or were later debunked. One video in particular accelerated the app's growth exponentially. A group of teenagers in Seattle received coordinates that led them to a beach, where they discovered a suspicious black suitcase. When authorities were called, the case was found to contain human remains connected to an ongoing investigation. The video went massively viral, and suddenly Randonautica was international news. The developers emphasized that this was a tragic but statistically inevitable event, given millions of users exploring random locations, not evidence of supernatural forces guiding people toward dark discoveries. Nonetheless, the incident cemented the app's reputation as something uncanny, potentially dangerous, and irresistibly fascinating. Downloads surged into the millions. The small servers hosting the quantum random number generation could barely keep up with demand. What had begun as an experimental research project had become a genuine cultural phenomenon, a practice adopted by countless people seeking to break their routine patterns and encounter something unexpected during a time when predictability and isolation threatened to suffocate the human spirit. But randonauting was not actually new. The impulse it satisfied, and the theory underlying it, had deep historical roots. In the 1950s, a group of French intellectuals called the Situationist International developed the practice of derive, or drifting. The derive involved walking through urban environments guided by aesthetic and emotional cues rather than practical destinations, deliberately abandoning the goal-oriented movement that capitalist organization of space enforced upon city dwellers. Guy Debord and his colleagues saw the drive as both artistic practice and political resistance, a way of reclaiming subjective experience from the instrumental rationality that reduced streets to mere transportation corridors. The Situationists developed the broader field of psychogeography, the study of how geographical environments affect emotions and behavior. They created maps showing cities reorganized according to psychological and experiential qualities rather than geometric accuracy. They analyzed how urban design channels movement and consciousness, and they sought methods for short-circuiting these controls, for discovering the hidden, unintended possibilities lurking in the spaces capitalism had organized for efficient production and consumption. Randonauting represents the latest technological iteration of this same fundamental human impulse, the desire to escape routine, to discover hidden layers of reality, to experience authentic randomness and genuine novelty in a world that increasingly feels predetermined. The quantum random number generator is simply a contemporary tool for achieving what the Situationists sought through artistic drift, and what countless spiritual traditions have pursued through practices like pilgrimage, to randomly determine sacred sites or divination systems that inject chance into human decision-making. What makes randonauting distinctive is its fusion of cutting-edge quantum physics with extremely accessible smartphone technology. You need no special knowledge, no artistic training, no commitment to political theory. You simply open an app, and the fundamental indeterminacy at the base of physical reality generates coordinates that break you out of your habitual patterns, if only for an afternoon walk. Whether quantum randomness actually provides access to information otherwise hidden in probability, blind spots, remains an open question. What seems undeniable is that the practice changes how participants experience familiar spaces, transforming neighborhoods they thought they knew into landscapes of possibility and strangeness. And in 2020, when the world had become intolerably small and predictable, that transformation was exactly what millions of people needed. The human brain is a remarkable pattern recognition machine, honed by millions of years of evolution to detect threats in rustling grass and opportunities in subtle environmental changes. This same extraordinary capability, however, comes with a curious side effect. We see patterns everywhere, even when none exist. And perhaps nowhere is this tendency more apparent than in the experiences reported by those who venture into the world of randonauting. When someone sets their intention to find something yellow, then walks to a random coordinate and discovers a bright sunflower growing through a crack in the pavement, what has actually happened? The immediate, visceral reaction is often one of wonder, a sense that something beyond coincidence has occurred. But cognitive psychology offers us a different lens through which to view this moment, one that is no less fascinating for its grounding in science. At the heart of this phenomenon lies confirmation bias, one of the most well-documented quirks of human cognition. Our brains do not process information like neutral computers. Instead, we selectively filter incoming data through the lens of our expectations, beliefs, and intentions. When a randonaut sets an intention before their journey, they are essentially priming their perceptual system to notice specific elements in their environment. This priming effect is extraordinarily powerful. Research in cognitive neuroscience has shown that when we are looking for something specific, our visual cortex literally processes information differently. Neural pathways associated with that concept become more active, more sensitive to relevant stimuli. Consider what happens when you decide to buy a particular model of car. Suddenly you start seeing that exact car everywhere you drive. The vehicles were always there, passing you on the highway, parked in your neighborhood, waiting at stoplights. But your brain filtered them out as irrelevant background information until you created a specific interest in them. This phenomenon is known as the Baader-Meinhof effect, or frequency illusion, named after the experience of hearing a new word or name, and then encountering it repeatedly in a short time span. The frequency itself has not increased. What has changed is your perceptual filter. For randonauts, this mechanism operates at full intensity. By consciously setting an intention, whether for an emotion like joy, a color like blue, or a concept like mystery, they activate vast networks of associations in their mind. These neural networks then influence what they notice, how they interpret ambiguous stimuli, and what they remember from their experience. A pile of debris becomes meaningful if it contains blue plastic fragments. A street musician playing a cheerful tune becomes evidence of joy manifesting. The intention acts as a cognitive highlighter, making certain elements of the environment pop into conscious awareness while others fade into the background. But the psychological mechanisms at work go deeper than simple selective attention. Enter apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful connections in random or meaningless data. First coined by psychiatrist Klaus Conrad in 1958, apophenia describes a fundamental aspect of how our brains construct reality from sensory input. We are meaning-making machines, constantly weaving narratives from the fragments of experience that bombard our senses every moment. This tendency served our ancestors well. The early human who saw patterns in animal migration, who connected the arrival of certain birds with seasonal changes, who found meaning in the movement of stars across the night sky, had survival advantages. Those who could predict when fruit would ripen based on subtle environmental cues, who could read coming weather and cloud formations, who could track prey by interpreting barely visible signs, passed on their genes more successfully than those who viewed the world as pure randomness. In our modern world, however, this same mechanism can create illusions of connection where none exist. The stock trader who sees patterns in truly random market fluctuations. The sports fan who believes their lucky jersey influences the game's outcome. The person who finds profound personal messages in the shuffle of a music playlist. Our brains are so hungry for pattern and meaning that we will construct them even from pure noise. Randonauting presents a perfect laboratory for apophenia. The entire practice is built on the framework of setting an intention and then receiving a random coordinate. From a statistical perspective, millions of randonauts are visiting millions of random locations. Some percentage of these visits will, by pure chance, contain elements that align with their stated intentions. If you send enough people to random locations looking for yellow objects, some will find yellow objects. This is not mysterious. It is mathematics. But the Randonaut's experience is not one of cold statistics. When that alignment occurs, when you arrive at a random point seeking closure and find an abandoned house with the door standing open, your brain does not think about probability distributions. It creates a narrative of connection, of meaning, of something reaching out to answer your call. This narrative feels real because, in a neurological sense, it is real. The emotional response, the sense of wonder, the feeling of significance are all genuine experiences, even if their underlying cause is apophenia, rather than supernatural intervention. Some researchers in cognitive psychology argue that the intention-setting feature of randonauting actually works against true randomness of experience in a psychological sense. Dr. Sarah Chen, a cognitive neuroscientist at the University of California, explains that when we prime ourselves with a specific concept or emotion, we are creating what she calls an expectation template in our minds. This template does not just influence what we notice. It actually shapes how we interpret ambiguous or neutral stimuli. A shadow becomes ominous if we set an intention for fear. A bird's flight becomes a sign of freedom if that is what we seek. The raw sensory data remains the same, but our interpretation transforms based on our pre-existing mental framework. This interpretative flexibility is not a flaw in our cognitive system. It is a feature that allows us to navigate a complex, ambiguous world with limited processing capacity. We cannot consciously analyze every detail of our environment. Instead, we use shortcuts, templates, and pattern matching to make rapid decisions about what matters and what does not. Context and expectation guide this process constantly, usually below the threshold of conscious awareness. The psychological state that randonauts enter as they approach their destination amplifies these effects. There is a documented shift that occurs when we move from our default autopilot mode into a state of heightened attention and novelty seeking. Neuroscience research using functional MRI scanning has shown that when we consciously decide to explore new territory or seek novel experiences, different brain regions become active compared to our routine, habitual navigation of familiar spaces. The dorsal attention network, which includes regions of the frontal and parietal cortex, shows increased activation during goal-directed exploration. Meanwhile, the default mode network, which is active during routine thinking and mind-wandering, becomes suppressed. This is not merely an academic distinction. The shift represents a fundamentally different way of processing our environment. In exploration mode, we are more alert, more curious, more likely to notice details we would normally filter out. Additionally, the anticipation itself creates a neurochemical state conducive to heightened perception. As randonauts walk or drive toward their random coordinate, their brains release dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with anticipation of reward. This dopamine release is not dependent on actually finding something meaningful. The possibility alone is enough to trigger the response. And dopamine does not just make us feel good. It also sharpens our perceptual systems, making us more attuned to our environment, more likely to notice unusual elements, more prone to making connections between disparate pieces of information. From this perspective, the randonauting experience can be understood as a form of self-induced altered state, not through drugs or meditation, but through the simple combination of random exploration, intentional priming, and heightened anticipation. The experiences reported by randonauts are real in the sense that they genuinely perceive patterns, feel connections, and undergo moments of insight or emotion. The question is whether these experiences reflect something about external reality or about the remarkable capacity of the human mind to create meaning and pattern from randomness. Skeptics emphasize that every reported randonauting experience can be explained through this combination of cognitive biases and psychological mechanisms. No supernatural intervention is required. No quantum manipulation of reality is necessary. The brain, in its normal operation, produces these experiences when placed in the specific conditions that randonauting creates. Yet acknowledging the psychological explanation does not necessarily diminish the value of the experience. Dr. Michael Torres, a clinical psychologist who has studied randonauting communities, points out that many beneficial psychological interventions work through these same mechanisms. Cognitive behavioral therapy uses priming and reframing. Mindfulness practices increase present moment attention. Exposure therapy for anxiety relies on approaching situations with new expectations. The fact that randonauting activates known psychological processes does not make it less potentially transformative for participants. In fact, Torres argues that randonauting might be particularly effective precisely because it combines multiple powerful psychological elements into a single practice. It encourages people to leave their routine environments, which breaks habitual patterns of thought and behavior. It promotes mindful attention to the present moment and immediate surroundings. It creates opportunities for novel experiences and encounters. It provides a framework for reflection and meaning-making. And it does all of this in a way that feels playful and adventurous, rather than clinical or therapeutic. The human need for novelty, for exploration, for moments that feel significant and meaningful is deep and genuine. Whether these needs are met through mechanisms we fully understand or through processes that remain mysterious may matter less than the fact that they are being met at all. The randonauting experience, viewed through the lens of psychology, reveals not the limitation of human perception, but its extraordinary creative power. We are not passive receivers of reality. We are active constructors of our experienced world, constantly shaping what we notice, how we interpret, and what we remember. This construction process is happening all the time, in every moment of consciousness. Randonauting simply makes it visible, turns it into an explicit practice, and transforms what is usually automatic and unconscious into something deliberate and experiential. In doing so, it offers a window into the remarkable, sometimes confounding, always fascinating workings of the human mind. In the summer of 2019, a user who identified herself only as Sarah posted an account to the Randonautica subreddit that would encapsulate something essential about the community's relationship with reality itself. She had been searching for her lost cat for 3 days, checking shelters, and wandering her neighborhood with increasing desperation. On the third night, sleepless and emotionally raw, she opened the Randonautica app and set her intention to find her cat. The coordinates led her 6 blocks away, to an alley she had already searched twice. There, behind a recycling bin, she swore hadn't been there before, sat her cat, waiting as if the universe had finally decided to answer her plea. What matters here is not whether the story is objectively true, but that Sarah and hundreds of others who commented on her post genuinely believed the app had responded to her emotional state, to her desperation, as if consciousness itself could reach into the probabilistic fabric of reality and pull out the exact thread it needed. This phenomenon, what randonauts call the desperation pattern, sits at the heart of a much larger question that has haunted humanity since the first person looked up at the stars and wondered about their place in the cosmos. Are we merely passengers in a mechanistic universe, or can our consciousness, our intentions, our very act of observing somehow influence the nature of reality itself? Randonauting has become an unexpected laboratory for this ancient question, transforming smartphones into divination tools and quantum random number generators into modern oracles that might, just might, reveal something fundamental about the relationship between mind and matter. The philosophical foundation that many randonauts build upon begins with simulation theory, the increasingly popular hypothesis that our reality might be a constructed system, possibly a computer simulation created by some advanced civilization or intelligence. This idea, while given contemporary framing by philosophers like Nick Bostrom in the early 2000s, echoes ancient philosophical traditions from Plato's cave to Buddhist concepts of Maya, the illusion of material reality. Within the randonauting community, simulation theory provides a framework that makes their experiences feel not only possible, but almost inevitable. If reality is indeed a simulation, then perhaps there are glitches to be found, backdoors to be exploited, or ways to interface with the underlying code through focused intention and quantum randomness. The app's reliance on quantum random number generation becomes crucial here. Unlike the pseudo-random number generators that power most computer functions, quantum random number generators supposedly tap into genuine quantum indeterminacy, harvesting randomness from quantum fluctuations that exist, according to our current understanding of physics, in a state of true unpredictability until the moment they are measured. This is where the observer effect from quantum mechanics enters the conversation, often with dramatic misinterpretations, but also with genuine philosophical weight. In quantum mechanics, the observer effect refers to how the act of measurement affects quantum systems. The famous double-slit experiment showed that particles behave differently when observed versus when unobserved, existing in superposition in multiple states simultaneously, until measurement collapses them into a single definite state. Randonauts have seized upon this concept with fervent conviction, interpreting it to mean that human consciousness, by virtue of observing or intending, can influence quantum outcomes, and therefore, influence the coordinates the app generates. The logic flows like this. If the app uses quantum processes to generate random coordinates, and if consciousness can influence quantum processes, then setting an intention before generating coordinates should theoretically influence where the app sends you. This interpretation takes significant liberties with how quantum mechanics actually operates at human scales, and ignores the problem of decoherence, where quantum effects wash out in larger systems. Yet the experiential reports from users suggest something is happening, even if the mechanism remains hotly debated. Physicists and philosophers who study quantum mechanics generally regard these interpretations with skepticism. The quantum effects observed in laboratories with individual particles do not scale up to create macroscopic phenomena like influencing GPS coordinates or manifesting specific locations. The quantum realm operates by rules that seem bizarre and counterintuitive to us, but those rules don't translate directly into a universe where thinking about an apple makes an apple appear. However, a minority of researchers, particularly in the emerging field of quantum biology and in consciousness studies, remain open to the possibility that quantum effects might play some role in biological systems and potentially in consciousness itself. The physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff have proposed that quantum processes in cellular structures called microtubules might be involved in consciousness, a controversial theory that most neuroscientists reject, but which keeps alive the question of whether mind and quantum reality might share some fundamental connection. For many randonauts, quantum mechanics provides less a scientific model and more a metaphorical language, a way to articulate experiences that feel simultaneously deeply personal and cosmically significant. The concepts of entanglement, where particles remain connected across distances, and superposition, where possibilities exist simultaneously until collapsed by observation, become poetic frameworks for understanding synchronicity, the experience of meaningful coincidence that seems to defy statistical probability. And here we enter the territory of Carl Jung, whose work on synchronicity and the collective unconscious has become central to how many practitioners understand their randonauting experiences. Jung proposed synchronicity as a causal connecting principle, a way that events could be meaningfully related without one causing the other through any known physical mechanism. He observed that his patients would often report meaningful coincidences during periods of psychological transformation, as if the outer world was mirroring inner psychic processes. Jung suggested that beneath individual consciousness lies the collective unconscious, a shared psychological substrate containing universal archetypes and symbols that emerge across cultures and throughout history. When randonauts report that their intentions seem to manifest in the physical locations they discover, they are describing something that maps almost perfectly onto Jung's concept of synchronicity, the sense that mind and world are participating in some deeper pattern of meaning. The desperation pattern mentioned earlier represents an intensification of this phenomenon. Users consistently report that when they use the app during moments of genuine emotional crisis, grief, loss, or desperate need for guidance, the results seem qualitatively different, more direct, more impossible to dismiss as mere coincidence. A woman searching for closure after her mother's death finds herself at a memorial bench dedicated to someone with her mother's exact name. A man contemplating ending his life is led to a wall where someone has spray-painted the words, "Your story isn't over yet." A teenager feeling utterly alone is brought to a park where a support group for LGBTQ youth happens to be meeting. These accounts flood the community forums, each one adding to a growing body of experiential data that seems to suggest consciousness and reality interact more intimately during moments of heightened emotion or psychological vulnerability. Parapsychology researchers, who study phenomena like telepathy, precognition, and psychokinesis, have taken interest in randonauting as a spontaneous, large-scale experiment in what they call psi phenomena. Dean Radin, chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, has noted that randonauting resembles formal experiments in micropsychokinesis, where participants influence random number generators through intention. Decades of laboratory research, while controversial and often criticized for methodological issues, have produced small but statistically significant effects, suggesting that conscious intention might influence random systems. The effect sizes are tiny, but they persist across numerous studies. Randonauting could be seen as taking this laboratory phenomenon into the wild, testing whether intention and quantum randomness might interact when the stakes feel real, when people are searching for meaning rather than participating in a controlled experiment. Critics point out the obvious problems with this interpretation. Selection bias looms large, as users are more likely to report and remember hits than misses. The human mind is extraordinarily adept at finding patterns in meaning, even in random data, a tendency called apophenia that served our ancestors well, but can lead us to see connections that don't exist. Confirmation bias ensures we notice events that align with our expectations while filtering out contradictory information. The base rate fallacy makes us underestimate how often unlikely events should occur by chance alone when millions of people are trying something. From a skeptical perspective, randonauting is simply sending millions of people to random locations where they search for meaning, and naturally, given how complex and symbol-rich the world is, they find things that seem meaningful to them. Yet, dismissing the entire phenomenon as mere cognitive bias may itself be a form of intellectual bias, an unwillingness to engage with subjective experience as legitimate data. Philosophers of consciousness like David Chalmers and Thomas Nagel have argued that first-person subjective experience presents genuine explanatory challenges that cannot be reduced to third-person objective description. The feeling of meaning, the experience of synchronicity, the sense that consciousness touches something beyond the material, these are real phenomena occurring in real minds, even if we disagree about their ultimate cause or significance. When thousands of people report qualitatively similar experiences, that pattern itself deserves investigation, not automatic dismissal. The metaphysical interpretation that many randonauts embrace might be understood as a contemporary expression of something deeper in human nature, what philosopher William James called the will to believe, our fundamental need to find agency and meaning in a universe that often seems indifferent to our existence. Throughout history, humans have developed technologies and practices to interface with what we perceive as the hidden dimensions of reality. Ancient peoples cast bones and read entrails. Medieval mystics scried in mirrors and crystal balls. 20th century spiritualists used Ouija boards and automatic writing. Each era creates tools that reflect its technological and philosophical assumptions while serving the same fundamental function, providing a method to feel that we can access knowledge beyond ordinary perception, that we are not isolated fragments in a meaningless void. Randonauting represents the smartphone age's contribution to this lineage. Quantum mechanics and GPS technology replacing animal bones and crystal balls, but serving remarkably similar psychological and spiritual functions. The fact that it is mediated through technology rather than ritual doesn't make it less significant as a human phenomenon. If anything, it demonstrates how our deepest needs persist, regardless of how scientifically sophisticated we become. We still want to believe that consciousness matters, that our intentions can ripple out into the world, that reality is responsive rather than indifferent. The probabilistic interpretation of reality that quantum mechanics introduced has inadvertently opened philosophical space for these beliefs to flourish. When physicists tell us that reality at its most fundamental level exists in superposition, that observation collapses probability waves into definite states, that entanglement connects particles across vast distances, they are describing a universe that sounds, to the non-specialist, remarkably magical. The fact that these quantum behaviors don't translate straightforwardly to the human-scale world gets lost in translation, and what remains is a sense that reality is far stranger and more malleable than classical physics suggested. Reality. Randonauts are not entirely wrong to sense that quantum mechanics has made the universe weirder. They may be wrong about the specific mechanisms, but the intuition that consciousness and reality relate in ways we don't fully understand finds some support even among mainstream philosophers of mind. What randonauting ultimately reveals is perhaps less about quantum mechanics or the nature of reality and more about human consciousness itself, about our remarkable capacity to create meaning from chaos, to see patterns and purposes, to refuse the nihilistic implications of a purely mechanistic universe. Whether the app actually taps into quantum consciousness or simply sends people to random locations where they exercise their meaning-making capacities doesn't change the fact that people are having transformative experiences, finding community, confronting fears, and feeling more connected to the world around. The experience is real, whatever its ultimate cause. In this light, randonauting becomes a mirror held up to some of our deepest philosophical questions. What is the relationship between mind and matter? Is consciousness fundamental to reality, or merely an emergent property of complex information processing? Can subjective experience tell us anything reliable about objective reality? These questions have occupied philosophers for millennia, and randonauting, for all its quantum mysticism and potential misinterpretations, keeps these questions alive in popular culture, making them urgent and personal rather than abstract and academic. Every person who opens the app and sets an intention is, in their own way, conducting an experiment in the nature of consciousness and reality, participating in humanity's ancient and ongoing quest to understand our place in the cosmos. The convergence began quietly, as these things often do, with scattered forum posts that seemed unrelated at first. In the autumn of 2022, a user named Driftmarker posted to the Randonautica community about an experience that had left them shaken. They had set an intention for truth, just that single word, and the coordinates had led them to a storm drain entrance in suburban Portland, Oregon. What should have been a 5-minute exploration became something they couldn't quite explain. The light inside the tunnel, they wrote, had a quality they'd never seen before. Not the expected darkness, but a kind of gray luminescence that seemed to emanate from the concrete itself, as though the walls were remembering daylight rather than reflecting it. 3 weeks later, across the country in Philadelphia, another user posted under the name Seeking Clarity. They had used the same intention, the same single word, truth. The coordinates brought them to an abandoned railway tunnel on the outskirts of the city. They described descending into the passage on a clear afternoon, checking their phone for the time, seeing it read 2:47. The tunnel stretched ahead, maybe 200 yards to a distant opening. They walked its length, their footsteps echoing in that particular way sound behaves in enclosed concrete spaces. But when they emerged on the other side and checked their phone again, 3 hours and 19 minutes had passed. The sun was setting. They had no memory of stopping, no sense of missing time, just the walk through and the impossible gap between moments. By December, 7 more reports had surfaced. Different cities, different tunnels, storm drains, maintenance access points, abandoned subway stations. But the pattern was undeniable. Users setting intentions related to truth, answers, or understanding were being directed to underground passages. And inside these passages, something was happening to time. The most detailed account came from a user called Temporal Witness, posting from Austin, Texas. They approached their experience with almost scientific precision, documenting everything. The coordinates had appeared on a rainy Thursday evening in early January of 2023, leading to a flood control tunnel that ran beneath a commercial district. Temporal Witness brought a fully charged phone, a mechanical watch, a flashlight, and an audio recorder. They noted the time on entry, 6:13 in the evening. The watch confirmed it. The phone confirmed it. The recorder's timestamp confirmed it. The tunnel was concrete, roughly circular, about 8 feet in diameter. Water trickled along the bottom, maybe an inch deep. The air smelled of minerals and wet stone, that particular underground scent of places where sunlight never reaches. Temporal Witness described the sound of their breathing, how it seemed to flatten out about 50 feet in, losing its natural reverb. The footsteps, too, became muffled, as though the air itself was thickening. Then came the light. Not the flashlight beam, which continued to function normally, but something else. A phosphorescent quality to the darkness itself, a sense that they could see the tunnel walls more clearly when they turned the flashlight off than when it was on. The gray-green luminescence that Driftmarker had described in Portland. The feeling that the concrete was glowing from within, powered by something other than chemistry or physics as commonly understood. Temporal Witness walked the length of the tunnel, measuring their pace, counting steps. 472 steps to the exit. At their normal walking speed, maybe 6 or 7 minutes. They felt calm, focused, aware of each moment. No sense of dissociation or lost time. They emerged from the other end, climbed the access ladder, and found themselves in a parking lot behind a closed restaurant. Their phone was dead, despite being fully charged 90 minutes earlier. The mechanical watch had stopped at 6:19, just 6 minutes after entry. But the sky told a different story. Full darkness had fallen. They walked to a convenience store 2 blocks away, where a wall clock read 11:41. 5.5 hours had passed. The timestamp on the security footage from the restaurant parking lot later showed them emerging from the tunnel access at 11:38. The audio recorder had captured the entire walk, their breathing, their footsteps, the sound of water. 7 minutes and 14 seconds of recording that corresponded to 5 hours and 25 minutes of external time. The online community response was immediate and fractured. Believers saw evidence of genuine temporal anomalies. Skeptics pointed to device malfunctions, false memories, attention-seeking fabrication. But then the mapping began. A user named Cartographer6 started compiling reports, plotting the tunnel locations on digital maps. The tunnels themselves showed no obvious pattern geographically. They were scattered across North America, a few in Europe, one report from Tokyo. But Cartographer6 noticed something else. When they overlaid geological maps, aquifer locations, and tectonic activity zones, certain correlations appeared. Many of the tunnels sat above or near underground water systems. Several aligned with minor fault lines. 3 corresponded to locations of historical significance, places where local folklore spoke of strange occurrences predating modern construction. The community developed theories. Some believed the tunnels were thin places, a concept borrowed from Celtic spirituality, locations where the membrane between different states of reality becomes permeable. The combination of intention setting through the app, the physical descent underground, and some quality inherent to these specific locations created conditions for consciousness to slip between temporal streams. Others proposed that electromagnetic anomalies in these locations, possibly related to geological features or underground water flow, disrupted electronic devices and created sensory effects that altered time perception. The stopped watches, the dead phone batteries, the strange light quality, all could be explained by localized electromagnetic phenomena that also affected human neurology, creating the subjective experience of temporal distortion without any actual disruption of time itself. A particularly detailed analysis came from a user identifying as a physicist, though their credentials remained unverified. They suggested that if the reports were genuine and not fabricated or misremembered, the most likely explanation involved altered states of consciousness rather than literal time distortion. The rhythmic act of walking, the sensory deprivation of the tunnel environment, the psychological priming from setting an intention and following coordinates, all could induce a mild dissociative state. In such states, time perception becomes unreliable. What feels like minutes can be hours. The brain, seeking to make sense of the gap, fills in a continuous narrative of walking through the tunnel, even if the person actually stopped, sat down, or experienced microsleeps along the way. But this explanation struggled with cases like temporal witness, where audio recording appeared to confirm the subjective experience. Skeptics suggested the recording could have been edited, the entire account fabricated for attention, or to perpetuate the mystery. Without independent verification, without controlled conditions, any individual report remained fundamentally unprovable. Yet, the reports kept coming. By spring of 2023, over 30 accounts had been documented, each following the same basic pattern. Intention related to seeking truth or answers. Coordinates leading to underground passages. Temporal distortion ranging from minutes to hours. Strange light quality. Physical sensations of altered air pressure, sound behaving unusually, a feeling several described as reality becoming thinner, less substantial. 4 users attempted to replicate temporal witnesses' documented approach. 2 reported similar experiences of missing time, though less extreme, gaps of 30 to 40 minutes during walks that should have taken less than 10. 1 reported nothing unusual, walking through their assigned tunnel in normal time with no strange sensations. The 4th never emerged from their tunnel and stopped responding to messages. Police located them 3 days later, confused and dehydrated, in a section of service tunnels 2 miles from their entry point, with no memory of how they'd gotten there or where the intervening time had gone. The community fractured over how to proceed. Some advocated for organized expeditions, multiple people entering these tunnels together with cameras and multiple recording devices, attempting to capture objective evidence. Others warned this was dangerous, that whatever was happening in these spaces, if anything truly was happening, should not be provoked or investigated by amateurs. The missing hours, the disorientation, the user found miles off course, these suggested real risk. A subset of believers developed an elaborate metaphysical framework. They proposed that consciousness itself generates reality moment by moment, and that intention, properly focused through tools like the Randonautica app, could guide awareness to locations where this generation process becomes visible. The tunnels were places where the usual solidity of experienced reality broke down, where the participatory nature of consciousness in creating the world we perceive became undeniable. Time distortion was a symptom of perceiving reality's construction rather than its finished product. Skeptics countered that this was pattern-seeking run rampant, taking a handful of unusual but ultimately explainable experiences and constructing a worldview around them. The urban exploration community had long known about certain tunnels and underground spaces that produce strange acoustic effects, visual phenomena from reflected light and water, and feelings of unease from low-frequency sound vibrations. Add to this the psychological expectation created by setting intentions and following mysterious coordinates, and you had perfect conditions for suggestion and false memory. The fact that not everyone reported temporal anomalies, that some tunnels produced nothing unusual, supported the idea that individual psychology, rather than location-specific phenomena, was the determining factor. What remained, beneath the theories and counter-theories, was the raw testimony of experience. The users who described walking through concrete passages and losing hours, who spoke of light that seemed to glow from within solid matter, who felt time stretch and compress around them like something physical, something alive. Their accounts carried a weight of genuine bewilderment, a searching for language to describe sensations that didn't fit conventional categories. Whether these experiences represented genuine anomalies in the structure of space-time and consciousness, or elaborate misperceptions generated by expectation and environment, remained unresolved. The tunnels themselves offered no answers, just dark passages beneath cities, where water runs and concrete ages, and some people, following coordinates generated by quantum randomness and human intention, reported walking through doorways in time itself. The community continues mapping, documenting, debating. New reports arrive sporadically. Some tunnels become pilgrimage sites for believers. Others are sealed by authorities concerned about trespassers and liability. The truth, whatever truth there is to find in these deep places, remains elusive as smoke, substantial as stone, waiting in the gray-green darkness, where time moves differently and reality grows thin. We began this journey with a simple question. What happens when you let randomness choose where you go? We followed the Randonauts into abandoned hospitals and forest clearings, watched them discover suitcases exactly matching their intentions, stood with them as they found meaning in coordinates generated by quantum fluctuation. We've traced the theory back through chaos magic and quantum mechanics, psychogeography, and Jung. We've heard the skeptics explain probability and pattern recognition, and we felt the shiver when coincidence feels like something more. Now at the end of this path, we find ourselves somewhere unexpected, somewhere that maps and algorithms cannot quite locate. The real discovery isn't whether the attractor points are genuine anomalies or elaborate, self-fulfilling prophecy. It isn't whether consciousness truly collapses quantum wave functions, or whether our minds simply excel at finding connections in randomness. What we've uncovered instead is something both simpler and more profound, that the question itself, the asking, changes us. The moment you set an intention and step outside your routine, something shifts. Not in the quantum field, perhaps, but in you. Think about what actually happens on a randonauting expedition. You open an app. You focus your mind on a concept, a hope, a fear. The algorithm generates coordinates. You travel somewhere you would never otherwise go, your attention sharpened by expectation, your perception heightened by intention. Whether you find a matching symbol or just an empty lot, you've already broken the pattern. You've already experienced something your usual Tuesday would never contain. You've transformed a random point on Earth into a destination, imbued emptiness with possibility. In a world of optimized routes and algorithmic suggestions, you've chosen to be lost. The Randonauts we met understood this intuitively. Sarah, finding her childhood doll behind the warehouse, told us it didn't matter if she'd somehow influenced reality or simply recognized significance in what was already there. The experience cracked something open. Marcus, who led us to the graffiti matching his deceased brother's tattoo, said afterward that he'd been walking the same 6 blocks for 5 years, seeing nothing, feeling nothing. The app gave him permission to look differently. The quantum randomness gave him permission to hope for magic. What he found, whether placed there by cosmic forces or random chance, gave him what he needed, a moment of connection in a universe that so often feels indifferent. This is the hidden layer the documentary has really been exploring. Not probability fields or consciousness effects, but the human hunger for meaning in an age that so efficiently explains it away. We live in a time when science can account for nearly everything, when mystery is something to be solved rather than experienced, when every strange occurrence has a Wikipedia entry detailing its mundane explanation. And yet, people by the millions downloaded an app that promised quantum magic. They walked to random coordinates seeking synchronicity. They wanted, desperately, to believe that their thoughts could touch the world, that meaning might be woven into reality rather than merely projected onto it. The timing matters. Randonautica exploded during the pandemic lockdowns of 2020, when millions were confined to the same rooms, the same streets, the same suffocating routines. When the future became unreadable and the present became a loop. Suddenly, here was an app offering genuine novelty, genuine unpredictability, genuine elsewhere. But more than escape, it offered agency. In a moment when so much felt beyond control, you could at least control your intention. You could set your mind on something and see what the universe returned. Even if that universe was just an algorithm in your own suburb, it felt like conversation. It felt like participating in reality, rather than just enduring it. What does it mean that we now outsource even our spontaneity to technology? That we need an app to tell us where to find wonder? There's something both sad and hopeful in this. Sad because it suggests we've lost the ability to break our own patterns, to seek mystery without digital permission. Hopeful because it shows that hunger for mystery still exists, strong enough that millions will follow quantum coordinates into industrial parks and creek beds, still looking, still hoping for something inexplicable. Perhaps this is just what exploration looks like now. We've mapped the physical world so thoroughly that the only terra incognita left is in the gaps between our routines, the nearby places we've trained ourselves not to see. Randonauting doesn't reveal a hidden magical world so much as it reveals how much of the ordinary world we've made invisible through habit. The abandoned playground, 3 streets over. The path that cuts behind the shopping center. The field you've driven past 1,000 times without once wondering what's in it. These coordinates exist whether or not an app sends you there, but without the prompt, without the intention, they remain theoretical, unvisited, meaningless. And meaning, we've learned, isn't something you simply discover lying on the ground. It's something that emerges in the interaction between mind and world, intention and circumstance, hope and happenstance. The randonauts create meaning by showing up, by deciding that this random location matters because they've traveled to it with purpose, by interpreting what they find through the lens of what they sought. Is this delusion? Or is this exactly how meaning has always worked? The cathedral is just stone until someone prays there. The photograph is just paper until someone grieves over it. The coordinates are just numbers until someone walks to them carrying a question. We live in a probabilistic universe. Quantum mechanics tells us that at the smallest scales, reality is not determined but potential, collapsing into actuality only when observed. Whether consciousness causes that collapse or merely witnesses it, the metaphor holds. We move through clouds of possibility that crystallize into experience through attention and action. The path you take determines what you encounter. The questions you ask shape the answers available. The random quantum coordinates become meaningful because you make them so, through the simple act of going there and carrying what you find. This doesn't diminish the magic. It locates it properly. Not in the algorithm, not in the quantum generator, not in some mystical field of intention, but in the meeting place. In the space where your awareness touches the world. Where randomness becomes story. Where coincidence, examined closely enough, reveals the pattern of your own concerns reflected back at you. Where meaning emerges, neither wholly subjective nor wholly objective, but co-created in the dance between self and circumstance. So, what have we really learned from the Randonauts? That breaking patterns opens us to novelty. That setting intentions focuses attention. That our familiar environments contain infinite layers we normally filter out. That humans will always seek enchantment, even in a disenchanted age, even if they have to ask an algorithm where to look for it. That the line between finding and creating meaning might be thinner than we think. That sometimes getting lost is the only way to discover where you actually are. The journey never really ends. There are always more coordinates, more intentions, more hidden corners in the mapped world. The question isn't whether randonauting reveals objective anomalies in the probability field. The question is, what patterns have you fallen into? What familiar paths have you worn so deep you can't see out anymore? What might you discover if you stepped sideways, into randomness, into purposeful disorientation? The coordinates don't have to be quantum generated. They just have to be outside your routine. The intention doesn't have to collapse wave functions. It just has to make you look differently at what you find. Maybe tomorrow, you drive a different route. Maybe you walk down the street you always avoid. Maybe you say yes to the invitation that makes no sense. Maybe you just stop and really look at something you pass every day but have never truly seen. The methodology doesn't matter. What matters is the willingness to break the pattern, to invite chance, to treat the ordinary world as if it might contain messages meant specifically for you. Not because it necessarily does, but because looking that way changes what you see. We end where we began, but different. The coordinates have changed us. Not magically, not mysteriously, but through the simple act of movement, attention, openness to surprise. The universe may or may not be listening. But you are. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps the anomaly we were seeking all along was just this: the capacity to transform the random into the meaningful, the mundane into the magical, the algorithmic into the personal. To walk into the world as if it has something to tell you. To come back with stories, whether anyone believes them or not. The steps continue. Somewhere, someone is walking toward coordinates they've never visited, carrying an intention, hoping for synchronicity, ready to find meaning in whatever waits there. The footsteps grow fainter now, fading into distance, into possibility. The journey doesn't conclude. It just opens outward, into all the unmapped moments, all the roads not yet taken, all the meanings not yet made. Listen. They're still walking. They might be walking forever. They might be you. That's where this journey ends for tonight. If you made it all the way here, subscribe and hit the bell for more long-form stories like this. Check out the